Announcements by Your Honour.
Minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, May 10th, 2023 to be deferred. Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I beg to move that the aforementioned minutes be deferred.
The question is that the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, May 10th, 2023 be deferred. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. At least the ayes have it. Those minutes are therefore deferred. Further announcements, I have apologies for absence from Senator Maladu, Senator Dr. Monroe Knight, and Senator Tate. An indication of lateness from Her Honour Senator Thompson and Senator Canon Dr. Rogers.
Petitions, presentation of papers, reports from select committees, questions to ministers, request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate and moved by a minister, introduction of bills.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the following bills and beg to move that they be read a first time. In the first instance, we have the Three Houses Spring Management Control Bill 2023, the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation Amendment Bill of 2023, and the Public Procurement Amendment Bill of 2023.
The question is that the Three Houses Spring Management and Control Bill 2023 and the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation Amendment Bill 2023 be read the first time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. Those bills are accordingly read the first time.
Public business, sir. Order number...
Public business is now the order of the day.
Sir. Order number 3, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution that report of the Standing Orders Committee on the amendments to the Standing Orders of the Senate be adopted.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I believe that the honourable members are aware of the proposal for the amendment of the standing orders to allow for the establishment of 3 joint select committees. I therefore beg to move that the report of the Standing Orders Committee on these amendments to the standing orders of the Senate be adopted.
Senator Boyce.
Mr. President, I rise in conjunction with the other members of this place to enter into discussion with regard to the resolutions tendered or the report provided. I have noted with interest the indication from the government of the continued expansion of the role of Parliament, considerations as to how we do things in our new republic. And of course, let me take the opportunity to congratulate the Deputy President on her appointment to the Commission, which would also be looking into the issues of our processes. For my part, sir, I note the objective, which is to enhance the way our Parliament functions. And I think there is an opportunity, sir, while we have this debate and considering what has been tabled before us, to look at the lessons. And you will realize, sir, this is a repetition of a theme I have said a few times. I said it in relation to the courts, and now I say it in relation to the Parliament. Sir, we learned some hard lessons in the pandemic that we survived. And while you were not in the other place where we were, sir, it was a trying time, and I think it forced solidarity. And it forced solidarity in the context, for the most part. There were one or two occasions of active citizenry dissent. But for the most part, it forced solidarity as we had to do what was necessary to continue the function of government. And I think all parties played their role and supported each other. I do remember, sir, a comment being made about the Prime Minister when the Prime Minister indicated that she was seeing a lot of afros. And the reason why you're seeing afros is because you couldn't go to get your hair cut because it was the pandemic. But we were forced to come out there and do what we could in these circumstances. And sir, coming out of this, I think that we should really focus while we are considering the debate on the standing orders for relations to committees to deal with embracing the technology. Embracing the ITC technology and culture which we relied so heavily on during the period where we could not leave our residences. And I think there's an opportunity for us, sir, to have a discussion about what we can have in terms of a hybrid house. And by hybrid house, sir, I mean being able to do the business of the people while present, but the definition of present is expanded to include the utilization of the necessary telecommunication and IT tools to allow active citizenry and participation by members who may not be physically on location. Now, what did we learn from the pandemic and what lessons? And the reason I was inspired in this whole trail of thought, sir, was I was looking at the issue of standing committees, and in doing my research, I realized the Parliament of Namibia actually has a standing committee on information, communication, technology, and innovation coming out of the pandemic, sir. And in doing this research and consideration, sir, I relied heavily on a report coming out of the Canadian Parliament who had to consider the issue of how much utilization of information technology should be utilized by their parliament and the question of the standing orders. Based on that, sir, I would like to make a contribution in the context as how we in Barbados could utilize the lessons from the pandemic for the consideration of the Parliamentary Reform Commission as well as the Standing Orders Committee for the context of a hybrid house, sir. And when I say hybrid house, sir, I'm not just speaking of throwing on a Zoom link and someone making their contribution. I'm talking about an opportunity to embrace the technology and the lessons that we have learned and to allow us to further this new republic with regard to how we do things. There is opportunity to be gained from the hard lessons that we learned, and hopefully, sir, this is something which will be tabled for the relevant persons to consider with regard to our operation. Now, sir, in a report tabled, The Future of Hybrid Proceedings in the House of Commons is January 2023, the Canadian Parliament considered this issue. They heard contributions from the UK Parliament, which you will know the differential, sir. The UK Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, because the fellas, the Welsh Parliament, and of course the Inter-Parliamentary Union, which apparently is quite sophisticated and running with regard to rounding up all the parliaments and getting information from them. And Barbados is a member. Simply put, sir, why a hybrid house? I believe, sir, that it would lead to increase in participation. This is something which has been stated as a goal of the government, and I believe that every citizen of Barbados can utilize the opportunity. And what do I mean by increased participation? Simply put, it means that persons who are absent, as we have today, would still be allowed to participate, of course, subject to rules and stricture as determined by the Standing Order Committee and members of the respective houses. Now, of course, with any idea or with any concern or with any attempt to change, sir, you know how we view change, there are, of course, concerns raised. In other words, would persons abuse this? Sir, I remember the situation, I don't know if we saw it on social media recently, where a parliamentarian, I believe out of the United States, when they called for the vote via Zoom, when it switched to him, he was in his underwear on a couch and said, "Hey," and they quickly switched off. That's what we talk about, the concerns as to how participants take part in these debates and how do we set what we consider standards. As employers during the pandemic, while we tried to utilize the remote technology, we recognized that some persons were maybe doing a little less while others were doing a little more. I actually recall having to beg a team member when we were doing a group meeting, please turn off the CNN so we can get the work done. Enough about that, sir. So the concerns is, of course, we recognize that if we implement this concept, you know, it will be a question of whether or not it will be subject to abuse. But, sir, there's also the flip side, wherein if a parliamentarian has to deal with an emergency, if a parliamentarian is dealing with a health issue, if a parliamentarian is dealing with a family member who needs to be dealt with, and we recognize that our parliamentarians, we are subject to a code of conduct, I believe, sir, that this is not an insurmountable concern. Now, when we get into the concept of debate, sir, technology, and how we use it, there are some who say that we will lose the spontaneous, the substantive cut and thrust, the asides, which we hear occasionally from certain members. I wouldn't call any names. Some are more active than none. But what we do recognize, sir, is what you lose in having this active debate with cut and thrust, maybe you gain with regard by increasing persons who are taking part. You were not here, sir, and in one of my actually the first contribution I made in this place was in relation to the amendment to the Constitution, which I supported, to allow persons of dual nationality to take part in the Senate. And at that time, the concern was raised that it was being done for a particular person or persons. But the reason it got my support, as with everything else, when you consider the rights, it was an expansion of the rights, and it expanded the net of persons who can serve and contribute to the development of Barbados. Because, sir, we recognize that governments come, governments go, but Barbados, Lord willing, will remain. And that is what we are here to do, sir, deal with Barbados and how we operate. So in that context, sir, what we lose in terms of old talk, asides, cut and thrust, we gain because more persons can participate. Indeed, sir, there was a study done which said, and this is in the same report out of Canada, that increase in the use of virtual hearings reduced the amount of heckling. Imagine that, sir. Imagine that. Now, it also presents, sir, the concept of a hybrid house, an opportunity for us to embrace the future as we encourage this active citizenry, and as the data show, hybrid and virtual participation encourages those who would not normally want to take part to do so. In other words, sir, if someone has obligations which take them out of the realm of being able to be here. Now, I understand the argument, you better be here, you ought to be here, but let's see. None of us know what the future holds. We could all be dealing with an illness, we could be dealing with a family member, we could deal with a variety of crises. Why do we not take the opportunity now, having learned what we did during the pandemic, to put things in place for the future that we do not know, to allow continued representation and to allow our parliament to go on? In that regard, sir, there's also stated in the document I referenced that this form of hybrid and virtual participation encourages those who are normally restricted by familial, business, or personal obligations. As I say, sir, it widens the net and is proven to increase diversity. And dare we say, sir, allow those who need to spend more time in their constituencies to do so. Now, while calling for all this pretty talk and this concept of what we could do, I recognize, sir, that there would be issues which spring to mind as hindrances. But I am confident that these are stuff that we can deal with. Firstly, sir, we will need to, of course, look at our parliamentary procedure and legislation. Well, that process has started, sir. So we are well on our way, and we have the opportunity, and we are dealing with standard orders. Sir, with anything to do with technology, we need to, of course, make sure we have the necessary personnel, we have the necessary infrastructure, and we have the necessary bandwidth in terms of allowing persons to participate. And sir, when we think about it, that's also an opportunity in terms of providing these services so that there's employment opportunity, sir, and there's business opportunity as we seek to expand. In other words, we have, I suggest, Mr. President, to stop thinking of Parliament as a physical location and think of Parliament as the collective of members who necessarily take part within the body and the debates. With anything to do with ITC, sir, security of data is, of course, essential. And in that regard, recognizing previous incidents and, of course, threats which have been done and, to the most part, mitigated, how do we learn from that with regard to ITC and the development of debating protocol? In other words, sir, there is opportunity here to grow our sophistication within the field. There's opportunity here to train persons to deal with it. There's opportunity here to see how we leverage those previous attacks to develop a system that is resilient to allow us to continue the debate. Sir, increase in members' confidence would need to be done. We need to ensure that all members, as well as they can WhatsApp, can take part in debates by using the various virtual tools. That then allows an increase in knowledge, which is then passed on to members, to those who they interact with. That's the type of what we call osmosis learning or diffusion of information, which allows the knowledge, and we recognize that this is the future, to continue, sir. In this regard, sir, if the concept of a hybrid house was ever to be done, we get to determine our own procedures. In other words, something as simple as a quorum. How is a quorum to be constituted? We engage it, we debate it, we make a determination. How do we do stuff like submitting documents? How do you make a document of the House? What is the protocol that we're going to put in place? Right now, sir, we already get the emails with regard of notices. We are already being sent from the Clerk of Parliament documentation as to what is to be debated. In a hybrid house, if a member wants to share a document, we can come up with the necessary standing orders and rules to allow this to work, sir. It can work. Another issue, of course, sir, would be voting. Now, certain parliaments have actually used the opportunity, sir, to create voting applications. Imagine the interest we can develop within the ITC, the entrepreneurial sector, with the development of an app for parliamentarians to vote. It has been done. It has been adopted in certain territories. We can set protocols in place with regard to how we encourage entrepreneurs to say, develop this process for us. These are the factors we want to have included to it. These are the security concerns that we have. For example, sir, if a member is not present, but is purporting to be voting, how do we know that that vote comes from the member? You can do ID with your thumb. You can have a visual interface to confirm it's the member. We should not shy away from it, but embrace the opportunity, and it would lead, sir, I dare say, to an increase in the sophistication. And also, we get to show off our integrity with regard to the process that we develop and set the parameters for. Now, sir, as with everything, it can't benefit all. In other words, we can't have the president participating in this debate virtually. They have tried it in other jurisdictions and they recognize it leads to some restriction. That's right, Mr. President, you might get too comfortable and doze off. But the point is simply this. the point is simply this, sir. With all these factors, with all these issues, with all these obstacles, which are not insurmountable, I want to reiterate, as we seek to leave the pandemic behind us and return to normal, I've said it before, employers say that work from home thing done, come back out. I understand why. I understand why. However, let us not lose the hard lessons that we have learned in the pandemic in our quest for normalcy. Sir, I traveled recently for the first time since the pandemic started, and I was so impressed with how smoothly the airport is operated with regard to the utilization of the kiosks. That is something which previously would have been an hour wait to go and see the fellas in the immigration, and that is now taking 15 minutes or even less. Technology can be incorporated to improve our everyday lives. Now, in closing, there's also an opportunity here for us to boast as a country. Let us adopt a serious hybrid house and continue this pugilistic tradition of punching above our weight. We are the world's newest republic, sir. We are the world's newest republic. Let us build on our legislative history. We know the shameful parts, we know the proud parts, but let us build on it and a new republic we are and show the world how we can do this, embracing the lessons that we've learned and paid for painfully to develop a better parliament, one that's more active and one that allows increased participation while still holding on to the values that we hold dear. Thank you, Mr. President, and I support the proposed.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. Senator Thompson.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the chamber. I wish to thank Senator Boyce for his intervention, which really sets the tone for the comments that I would wish to make in support of this matter. I also want to thank him for his congratulations on my appointment to the Parliamentary Reform Commission. I'm not going to be long. I really just wanted to rise to encourage members of the chamber to really give thought and support to the Parliamentary Reform Commission. In 1966, when we gained our independence, we were in a position where we were continuing a system that had been imposed on us. Perhaps politically, it was not prudent in the 1960s for a micronation state to reject what was then the dominating governance model across the world and to sever completely our ties with the former colonial masters. But this is many years hence. This is a time in which we have a better sense of who we are as a Black-led nation and a majority Black population. This is a time when we have been able to achieve and in fact to excel in matters that we have developed with a Barbadian DNA. When you speak to people out of the largest economy in the world, the United States, they are amazed that every child in Barbados has access to education from nursery to tertiary. They are in utter amazement that everyone can have health care. We learned from Sagari, from Everton Weeks, from the 3 Ws, what it was like for Black men born in colonial Barbados in poverty to play the game or the sport of the colonial masters and best them at it. And it wasn't just that we had excellence on the field, it was the intelligence with which we played the game. We have developed models of management. I mean, there is no gainsaying that Barbados has the best roads network in the Caribbean. We quarrel about the potholes, but the reality is there is not another country in the Caribbean that comes close to it. Or international communications, we expect to be able to pick our telephones up and reach the entire world, and we do. We expect that there will not be brownouts or blackouts in terms of our electrical powers. And this is a country where we are running it ourselves. So that now we are being asked to bring our mind to the issue of our own governance, of developing models in our likeness and image, of taking cognizance of the historical realities while asking ourselves as a nation state, what models of government do we think we can best develop for ourselves that reflects who we are, that are aspirational for all our people, that work better in the context of a micronation state. And I therefore want to invite the members of this chamber who will be invited to address the Parliamentary Reform Commission and to make recommendations, suggestions, share ideas, to give serious thought to this issue and to the interconnection with the Constitutional Reform Commission. Because for the first time in our history, in a parliament that is the third oldest in the Commonwealth, we will have an opportunity as legislators to say what we truly want our governance model to look like, and what we want it to look like as a new republic, and as a country that has proven that even with slim natural resources, we can make this country work. Not perfect. Oh, there are all kinds of things that we need to correct and to get absolutely right. But we have to admit that we've done pretty well by the grace of God. So that we must take this opportunity to speak to and to think about the structures that we want. And I was really grateful that Senator Boyce spoke on this matter and spoke in the way that he did, because it addressed one of the options that we have to consider, and that is how we embrace the technology to create a more relevant, inclusive, engaging, and engaged legislature. But there are many other questions which the Parliamentary Reform Commission invite us to consider. Should we have a bicameral or unicameral legislature? Should the members of the Senate, if it will continue to exist, and in what format, be elected or non-elected? Selected, should it be a hybrid chamber where there are some elected persons and some selected persons? What is the optimal composition of the House and the Senate? What interests should the Senate chamber reflect? How do we make it also the mouthpiece, or how do we ensure that it is the mouthpiece not of select groups, but of the wide cross-section of Barbadians, so that their views find resonance, find place first and residence in the national polity and in national discourse? What should be the structure of the Parliament? How many constituencies should we have in the country? Do we have too many? Do we have enough? Considering the population growth and the urban sprawl and urban development, how do we rejig, or should we rejig, constituency boundaries to reflect the growth in our constituencies. Rural Barbados is shrinking perhaps in terms of the number of people who are living in it. But you have the St. Philip constituencies becoming some of the largest constituencies in the country, once thought to be rural Barbados. You have St. James South, which I believe is still the largest or the second largest constituency in the country, Central Barbados. I remember, sir, when the Scouts Jamboree was held back there perhaps in the early 1970s. You helped cut bush? Well, sir, I walked on the grass that you cut. And all of that, which became Wanstead, Husbands, Oxnards, that large urban and middle class sprawl in the center of St. James South, quite literally, was just bush. And thousands of scouts from all over the world came to Barbados and used that area for their base and their camp. Some of the young people in here so would not know of what we speak. They're looking a little puzzled, like, wait, you mean what happened to the houses of Wanstead? Where they was there? We're not there. They did not exist. I'm introducing some element of levity, but the reality is that this is an issue that we need to confront. What about the standing orders? Are they still really applicable and suitable? And are those the standing orders which 20, 50 years from now we want this Parliament to operate by? Can we use something in our historical or more recent experience or in terms of models that have been developed elsewhere to have standing orders that are more effective? In that regard, sir, in fact, we really should ask the question, because there are now many different governance models, not only in the Commonwealth, but outside of the Commonwealth. And we need to examine some of those to determine whether they can add value to what we do here and how we do it, or to determine whether or not, cognizant of the fact that we always punch above our weight, we should develop a model that then others would want to replicate and follow because they think it adds value to their lives and their government and governance structure. There's a question of innovation and technology, and Senator Boyce spoke indeed to how it will enable interventions from those who are unavoidably absent. We have already had to change some of the rules. For instance, the provision that to become a senator, you had to have been present in the jurisdiction for at least a year or some such, really was a rule that was developed in a time when there was not instantaneous, in the palm of your hand, news feeds. So that if you were living out of the jurisdiction for a long time, you were truly disconnected from it. And modes of transportation did not allow you, because cross-Atlantic travel is really a relatively recent phenomenon, though we accept it as part of how we do business and how we live. But there was the time when to get to London, you would have gotten on a boat and probably turned up in London, what, 2 months later or something of the sort. I don't know how long it took, sir. I am not that connected with the history. I see the young people looking. Indeed. So that with modern transportation, modern communication, modern news, it is possible for somebody to live outside the jurisdiction, but be more involved and connected to what is happening in Barbados. Some people who live here, by listening to call-in programs, by being on the social media, by getting video and audio feeds from friends as to what is going on, by following voice notes, you can be very connected. And if needed, you can be here very quickly. So the reality is that that did not make sense. It was a rule that didn't make sense in the context of modern transportation and communications capabilities, and it was changed. Therefore, let us look at the rules to see what else can be changed for the better functioning of the Parliament and the greater inclusion of a larger number of Barbadians having regard to modern technology and modern capabilities. I caution, however, that even as people travel on business, that we wouldn't want to be in a situation where the desk or the table is empty because so many people are absent and it sending in their pre-recorded statement or joining the debate via the technology. We want to be able to keep a presence in the chamber. So while we want to utilize the technology, I am a little nervous about the extent to, or the potential for abuse. And I am not knocking at all Senator Boyce's suggestion, which I do support in principle, but I would really want us to examine that further. So there are a range of issues which I think that the establishment of the Parliamentary Reform Commission allow us to consider, to contemplate, and perhaps to change as we deem necessary. And I really invite this chamber. We do not always agree, but the one thing that I am sure we agree on is that there is no shortage of intellectual capacity in this room. We are people who are educated in this country and often reflect in our arguments in the style in which we present the best of Barbadian education and an understanding of our social cultural realities. And it is that kind of celebration which I would want for you all to bring to this issue as when you come to present, or when we come to you for you to present to the Parliamentary Reform Commission. It is a significant opportunity and time in our history. It is also a time in which small island developing states such as our own are struggling for recognition and equity and presence and place on the international stage, where we have to keep fighting day after day because the geopolitical issues with which we struggle, from climate change to security to issues like COVID and the broad-reaching implications for health, society, and economy that we perhaps had not even contemplated when we first heard of the disease. Make us now have to look at issues through a different kind of lens. And if you see, for instance, where there was vaccine hoarding and the struggles that we had as small nations to be able to protect and secure the health, well-being, and lives of our people in the context of what was happening internationally at the time. So there are a lot of issues still that as a new republic, we must contemplate how we want to position the country going forward. And this reform process helps us to self-define. It helps us to get a better sense of who we are, what we are capable of, and how we are positioning ourselves with our own indigenous vision, not an imposed reality, not an imposed vision or an imposed identity. So these are significant issues. The issue of the staffing of Parliament during the course of the debate on the appropriation bill, Senator Tate spoke at length about the issue of staffing and support for parliamentarians. I'm not going to get into the issue of remuneration, particularly of those in the Senate, but I am going to speak to the issue of the kind of support that is needed. You have a Senate, you have a Parliament, but you don't have a research staff. Routinely, executives, parliaments all over the world have research and support staff. What is the size of our staff? Do we need a parliament that is functioning more full-time? We are today looking at the matter of standing committees. What standing committees does this parliament need? What standing committees does this parliament need to function and to function well? What areas, and Senator Boyce has suggested a new area, what areas should those standing committees address? So there are a whole number of issues that arise out of the issue of the Commission on Parliamentary Reform, and I invite, as I indicated, senators to think about it and to come prepared for us to have robust discussion about what we want and to effect the change that we want to see. Mr. President, sir, I hope I have not trespassed on the time of the leader of government business for too long. Oh, so you're giving me more time? Bless you, sir. Bless you, sir. I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing. But no, I really am at the end. I'm just being playful, sir. So I will have spoken. People are saying, sir, in my 5 remaining minutes, that there are too many reform processes that are ongoing, but they are necessary, they are interconnected, and they are timely. Because coming out of COVID, there is a pre-COVID world, there is a post-COVID world, there is the pre-COVID labor market, there is the post-COVID labor market. There is the pre-COVID society, there is a post-COVID society. And I say that because COVID really has changed the way we interface. Grandmothers are now meeting their grandchildren via Zoom and other social media platforms. That was unthinkable pre-COVID. Now it is routine. My mother at 97 had a birthday party via Zoom. And she was so excited that people from all over the world were attending her birthday party who could not physically come at the time because of COVID and so on. So, as we contemplate, and then I was making the point that these processes really are timely, they are important, they are essential, and we have to commit to them because they allow us to truly take fresh hold of the reins of national significance, the reins of national governance, the reins of national organization, national institutions, and create from them, send them in the direction that we want them to go, and create new, strong institutions that are reflective of the history of our capabilities and a new vision for our country. So with those words, sir, I wish to exhort the wider public to be part of the process. We will be using the electronic media, physical town hall and other meetings. We will be inviting written submissions. I want to close then by saying that it is my honor to serve with Sir Richard Cheltenham, who has perhaps done more commissions of inquiry, whether as counsel or chair across the Caribbean, than has any other senior counsel or Queen's Counsel in our region, to serve with representatives of other political organizations, with people who have experience in commissions, with bright young people, and a mixture of individuals. And I hope, sir, that we really can do work which gives justice to the terms of reference and to the mandate called on for such an important look at our national institution and one of our premier national institutions. I am obliged to you, sir.
Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the two honourable members of the Senate who spoke. And as I gave in an aside, I'm looking forward to when the actual debate takes place, when a resolution is actually presented to the Senate and the committees are established, what the depth of conversation will be at that time. So thank you very much, Mr. President. I beg to move now that the Senate adopt this resolution, this board report, this report from the Committee on Standing Orders.
The question is that the Senate adopt the report of the Standing Orders Committee. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The next, the ayes have it. The report of the Standing Committee is therefore adopted. And the Standing Order is accordingly amended in accordance with the provisions of the Standing Orders.
Order number 1, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the state, situate at Black Rock, in the parish of St. Michael, for community agricultural purposes.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is a simple but not quite so simple resolution. Simple in the sense that it is simply the matter of vesting a piece of land, parcels of land in the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation, an entity, BADMC, known to all. It is earmarked for agricultural development, and it was on lands previously assigned to the psychiatric hospital, which we are familiar with in the area. That is the simple part of it, Mr. President. Perhaps the not so simple part of it is what it is intended for. And the reason why I want to spend just a few moments this morning, Mr. President, speaking about the not so simple assignment that has been given to the BADMC with the acquisition of this land, the vesting of this land, Mr. President, is really because you typically do not see in Barbados, in urban, densely populated communities, agricultural development. That's not typically your first thought. When you think of agricultural development, when you think of community backyard projects, you typically think of rural areas and what happens in rural communities. Mr. President, why is this important in the context of a global community that is treating to a range of issues? Food insecurity, increasing global prices associated with food, and the resulting impact on those who are existing at the bottom of the income gap. Those who have the lowest level of income, Mr. President, are most adversely affected by food insecurity and by increasing food prices. But that becomes even more complicated, Mr. President, when you understand that when you start to deal with these issues in those communities that are at the bottom of the income gap, it becomes even more complicated to ensure that they have access to healthy food. It is easy when you have limited income to buy something that is quick and filling. But sometimes, Mr. President, and I know that one of my honourable members who just caught my eye, and she probably should have kept her head down in that moment, has had an extensive conversation with the nation over several years about things like macaroni pie and sauce and those kinds of things. But in a very unfortunate conversation, I'm being told, especially when she started to attack bread pudding with rum sauce most recently. But I know. But Mr. President, I think one of the things that this administration has sought to do, and I want to commend the minister with responsibility for agriculture, for the extensive work which has gone into that ministry, whether we're talking about the feed program, whether we're talking about the community empowerment programs, whether we're talking about the launch of work on the medicinal cannabis as well, also represented in this honourable chamber. We have seen a considerable body of work coming out of the Ministry of Agriculture on the ground. The Lears Land Lease Project is there, Mr. President. But now we have something taking place that is slightly different. It brings community agricultural projects into urban areas. And when we start to talk about urban areas, we then have to expand the conversation into looking at what a government is doing to ensure that urban areas are enfranchised in the same way that rural areas are, or perhaps areas that are typically populated by those who are at the higher end or the middle ends of the income gap. Mr. President, this is a government. When we talk about the broader issue of urban development, this is the government that a few years ago we took a beating. We took a beating because we made a determination that opposite Fairchild Street bus terminal, we were going to restore that area and regard our cultural patrimony as a part of our own development trajectory. But we also made a determination in the middle of the city that people needed to have access to park spaces which were livable. And that then found itself with a visible manifestation that is Golden Square Freedom Park. We see Golden Square Freedom Park in the middle of urban Bridgetown, connected to communities that potentially would not normally attract such tourism-related activity or culture-related activity, but it has very much been a part of the urban regeneration of the Bridgetown area, Mr. President. We have had national events taking place in Golden Square. We have had cultural events. We even have some churches conducting services in many instances in Golden Square. But when we think of Golden Square, we no longer think of dilapidation, problematic smells as you walk past the area, lack of identity because you have buildings which are crumbling, but you see urban rejuvenation taking place in that space. We have also in the middle of Bridgetown, you've heard, I certainly have heard for as long as I can remember about the rehabilitation of the Bridgetown area. And so you have quite a bit of work that we expect to see happening in the Bridgetown area and therefore benefiting the surrounding areas. But here, we have now in the Black Rock area, a community surrounded by Deacon's Farm, Ferniehearst, Rosemont, all of the Black Rock communities where dense populations live. And in many instances, there is a need for us to create a thinning of that density, but greater access to opportunities. And that is where a project like this comes in, Mr. President. A project that ensures that persons, when we talk about community agriculture, we talk about what people in communities are able to do with limited land space. We begin to talk about things like the half cans, which many of us have in our backyards, where you're able to grow your fruit, your vegetables in particular, and so on. But Mr. President, I live in a rural community. I am from St. George, born and bred, and I went to school, at least up to primary school in St. George. My family, especially on my father's side, is from St. George. And my father lived his whole life in St. George. My father's family lives in St. George. I recently, when I was looking to move out of the city, we're in St. Michael, where my mom lives, I made the decision that I only wanted to live back in St. George, where I was from, and that is where I now live. Mr. President, my mother, who lives with me as well, just yesterday or day before, one or two, my neighbor gave my mother a plantain suckling. And my mother planted it in the garden. And she got the first harvest from her plantain tree 2 days ago. I don't even know if you call it a tree, what you call it, but those who are into agriculture and who can grow things and not like me, who could kill a cactus, would know better. But my mother got her first harvest of plantains. I am at perpetual war every evening, if I'm home at that time, with the monkeys for going up in my golden apple tree or my mango tree. Every evening. I don't have a problem with them getting some, but I don't want them to get all. Leave some for me. Imagine I am having this negotiation with the monkeys, and they sit down and they listen, They sit down and they listen to you. But what is important, Mr. President, is that my neighbor has a breadfruit tree. I don't have one. And from time to time, my neighbor will call my mother, and she will say, I put breadfruit there over your fence for you. When you're ready, come and get it. She has Bonneville peas, which I do not like, but my mother loves. And she comes and she says, I put some Bonneville peas over the fence for you. My mother, whatever we have in our garden, my mother will put over the fence for her and for our other neighbor. And we share in that community. But you know what, Mr. President, is important to me and what I have also been conscious of? There are people who are poor who we support at times in the community. So there are people who have been unemployed or are underemployed, And sometimes you support them getting their children into school, helping them with school uniforms, helping them with, especially if you're in primary school, with books. Sometimes you put a little extra in your own supermarket cart to make sure you take it for them, especially if they're elderly. But you know what, Mr. President, in a rural community you have, those same people who have very little, they will call you and say, I got pears on my tree. You got pears or you want some? They will call you and they say, we picking breadfruits. You want some? Or they'll call you and say, we just got chives in the garden and we cutting some. I'm sending some for you. Rural communities, even oftentimes where they don't have a lot, but they have land, they share what they get from their land and what they grow in their communities. Urban communities, with the absence of land in many instances provided for home projects, and in many instances, large trees which will grow the breadfruits and stuff like that, don't always have those same opportunities. So the provision of land in communities like this one in Black Rock, where people have the opportunity for community agricultural projects so that they can not only grow healthy food and consume healthy food, because I'm going to connect this back into the school's nutrition policy in a minute, when they can grow and eat healthy food, but also connect it to the things which my own ministry is concerned about: entrepreneurship, small business development, and the growth of those businesses to serve more than their communities, but to be in a position to become scalable to serve their country, Mr. President. But here is what is also important tonight, and you know, sometimes when we start to deal with these things, we mustn't see them as abstract things that come from somewhere else. They must also connect to who we are as people. I remember, Mr. President, as I watched this country have a discussion around the merits and the demerits of this national nutrition policy for schools, and whether it is beneficial and who it is hurting in some instances as it is rolled out and people change their behaviors. At the core of this, Mr. President, is what happens in our households and what we are socialized into eating. I remember, Mr. President, when my own daughter, she's 23 years old now, but when she was about 3 years old, and she was at school in the United States, the school that she went to did not allow you to bring, she's 23, right? I said she's 23. She was 3 then, so this isn't just a new policy that was being implemented, something yesterday. For her, this was something that we were navigating when we lived in the US, and she was 3 years old. The school did not allow soft drinks. It did not allow anything that had sugar in it. It did not allow white flour. If you had a birthday and you wanted to bring a cake to school for the children to celebrate, you could not bring cakes with icing or buttercream or anything like that. They were very, very clear on what was allowed in the school. Water. Your children had to go to school with water bottles. She was 3, she's 23, so this is a long time ago. She had to go to school with water. If there was a birthday party or something, you could take something like unsweetened banana bread, because they considered that the banana was enough of a sweetener and you didn't need to have added sugar. You would then have all kinds of things that were or were not allowed, and if you took something to school that was not allowed, it would come back home. It was not allowed. And that was at 3 years old. When we moved back to Barbados, she was 6 years old and went into private primary school here. And I remember being horrified watching children come to school every day, because I had not been socialized in my school experience up until that time to see it happening with children, and her palate had never been adjusted to it. So every day people would stop at the nearest bread shop and they would come to school with jam puffs and turnovers and all the heavy breads and heavy sugars in their lunchbox. And so they were socialized from that early age into eating the things that my daughter at 3 in the United States was socialized into not eating. So this is about mindset, Mr. President. It is about socialization, what we have been socialized into doing and consuming, and as a result, having a taste for. But at the same time, Mr. President, let us not function from a position of privilege. Healthy foods are oftentimes more expensive than unhealthy foods. I remember also being personal about it, Mr. President. I remember when I was required to change my own diet. I don't eat white rice. I can't eat white rice. I don't eat pasta. I can't eat white flour. I don't consume it. But if I want to buy brown rice, it is more expensive. When we did the price compact, Mr. President, earlier this year, one of the findings of the Ministry of Commerce was that the prices of vegetables were higher than anything else within the compact. The prices on healthy food, it is a reality, will always be more expensive than a ramen, which is pasta, you add hot water, you have a little seasoning, high sodium content, but it is filling. And we have to be able to now integrate community agriculture products, tax zero, or rather net tax zero. I guess what I want to be able to frame it out as looking at the tariff structure around healthy foods to ensure that you transfer the tariffs on healthy foods into unhealthy foods, making healthier foods more affordable for people, and therefore lessening the cost to the healthcare system as a result of non-communicable diseases, and also recurring issues that can be resolved in terms of obesity, in particular, childhood obesity. Those are some of the things that we have to be able to navigate. And it is on that basis, Mr. President, that in my own ministry a few weeks ago, specifically with the Barbados National Standards Institution, we had what I consider to be an excellent meeting with the Healthy Caribbean Coalition. And one of the things that we have given our support to has been front-of-package labeling in some instances, which outline what the challenges are with the kinds of things that we consume. So that a consumer like me, who, when I was younger, who never used to read nutrition labels, now I want to know what is in what I am eating. Is it predominantly starch? Is it predominantly flour? Is it predominantly sugar? Is it predominantly salt? What is in it? Because I want to be able to choose what I put into my system. And I think that in a project like this, Mr. President, which I am hoping through the Ministry of Agriculture, that we're able to tie the integrated themes of urban regeneration, lifestyle change and transformation, community empowerment and enfranchisement, in particular those at the bottom of the income level, and result, therefore, Mr. President, in systemic socio-economic transformation, which allows for the enfranchisement of these communities. Now, in the United States, there is a raging conversation around what they describe, even in the non-clementure, there is no consensus. There's a raging debate in the United States around what they describe as food deserts. There is a conversation as to whether or not you should call it a food desert, if you should call it food apartheid, if you should call it a food barrage. What should you call it? But simply put, it is a categorization that speaks to the systemic disenfranchisement of lower income communities by not making affordable, healthy food available to them. In places like the United States, it may be driven by what they describe in some of the literature as systemic racism. In Barbados, it is an entirely different conversation because it's specific to income levels. And this, in turn, perpetuates a class system where mobility from a people from income level to income level and class to class oftentimes is driven by persons being able to have access to education, higher incomes, and then in turn, they do what most of us have to acknowledge we do. We move out of these communities into other communities, leaving these communities to either recycle themselves or to continue to perpetuate a cycle of disenfranchisement. This is one of the initiatives, Mr. President, that I have said as I started, it may seem like a simple land vesting, but the issues that it attempts to navigate in this particular community and hopefully all across Barbados will be far more complex than a simple matter of land vesting. But instead, it speaks to a government who is committed to enfranchisement and empowerment of all, not just of some. It speaks to a government who is committed to ensuring that we can lower the cost of health care and to keep our people safe and healthy for longer, Mr. President. It speaks to a government that is committed to ensuring that there are pathways to resilient agriculture evolving, not just in rural spaces, but also in urban spaces. And then finally, Mr. President, it speaks also to a government who is committed to treating to the issues of post-pandemic recovery. I want to close my comments, Mr. President, by treating to a number of recommendations that I have drawn from a range of development institutions that have spoken to some of the issues relating to this, spoken to some of the issues relating to what I have raised. They have raised issues relating to food trade and ensuring that food trade keeps flowing. Now, on an earlier measure, my colleague, Deputy President of the Senate, spoke about what happened in the COVID-19 pandemic, where there was vaccine hoarding, vaccine apartheid. Equally so, Mr. President, during the pandemic, and certainly since the war has begun, we have seen export restrictions being imposed in some countries to be able to keep certain food items in country, therefore making it very difficult for other countries to be able to access those things. That is a challenge to countries like Barbados, and it hurts the poorest of the poor by making the prices go up as a result of introducing scarcity into the supply chain. And so there must be an end to export restrictions on food items. Secondly, Mr. President, and this is what this measure is about, ultimately, jump-starting agricultural production. Now, in the Ministry of Agriculture, you have heard certainly I have heard Prime Minister speaking on more than one occasion, and you have heard the Minister with responsibility for agriculture also speaking on more than one occasion about increasing the production of 6-week crops, so that Barbados is able to produce 6-week crops, limit its food import bill by ensuring that these items are produced locally, providing an income for farmers, allowing farmers to be able to grow their businesses and to be able to feed their families and to support their communities, but also to ensure that where there are shortages of these items globally, that Barbados is also able to produce them locally. There are also measures to propose or to connect the agricultural sector to the wider productive sector, including in tourism. I can see, Mr. President, based on what we have seen evolving in the agricultural sector, where once upon a time you only used to have open field agriculture. You only used to have large tracts of land, and then from those economists in here will talk about the basic factors of production. There was always a historical notion that for agriculture, one of the basic factors of production which Barbados lacked was land. But technology, we just had a lengthy discourse on the use of technology. Technology has so evolved, and the world has so evolved, that agriculture no longer depends on a principal factor of production like land, where you can have container farms and all kinds of things which are climate controlled, but also climate smart agriculture. Barbados, with a deficit of land for agricultural purposes, now has an opportunity in urban communities to roll out an extensive program of climate-smart agriculture that uses both technology and container infrastructure, for example, to be able to ensure that there is access to food production. Finally, Mr. President, there has to be the connection, as I started to mention, the wider productive sectors, so you have the connection to the manufacturing sector. While we have produced, in the first instance, in some instances, you have small-scale producers, medium-scale producers, large-scale producers, where they go into an aggregated facility for the purpose of agri-processing and then value-added manufacturing. That also is a part of our development trajectory. And of course, the consumption of around, currently the number stands at around 5% of agricultural production is fed into the tourism sector. That feeds the hotels and the restaurants, and there's an opportunity to ensure that there is even more for us to do. And when I say tourism, I'm talking about hotels, restaurants, and of course, cruise ships that oftentimes receive provisioning support from here in Barbados. Then, Mr. President, this is where I think Prime Minister's question of logistics hub development becomes a critical part of our conversation. Mr. President, can you see a Barbados where small community farms, medium farm-sized farmers, large-scale farmers, whether open field or in technology-driven type agricultural production, are able in an aggregated facility to be able to produce larger volumes than we had before, have value added, Mr. President, and then build a local supply and value chain that then translates into an export trade with regional partners and international partners. And if we were to speak to the regional partners then, we already know that the President of Guyana and the Prime Minister of Barbados have committed to partnering in the areas of agriculture, and that there has been a component of community agriculture built into many of the programs between Barbados and Jamaica and Guyana to allow for communities, youth, and even the disabled to participate in some of those instances where you have farming on the one hand with products and goods, but also with black belly sheep. That is one of the things that is earmarked. So, Mr. President, this is an important resolution, and I would want to be able to see more of this evolve all across Barbados, and with it, the conversation among our people about enfranchisement, empowerment, and ultimately inclusion going hand in hand with the other transformational policies that the government is rolling out or preparing to roll out, including education sector reform, business sector transformation, export diversification, value and supply chain development, and ultimately the benefits that redound to a nation that has been transformed by coherent individual policies that then collate into overall transformational policy. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
Senator Dr. Buffett.
Thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing me and giving me the opportunity to comment on this important resolution proposal that has been brought to this chamber. I would like to begin by congratulating Senator Cummings for what I consider comprehensive treatment of the subject of food and agriculture in the context of our reality. My comments will support much of what she presented. And I would like to take this opportunity also to congratulate the government on its efforts to promote agricultural development in Barbados. I'm aware that in this country, there are persons who believe that our land should be sold to the highest bidders for hotel development, for golf courses, and for housing. I also know that there are those among us who believe that agriculture is something of the past and something that we should not spend our time and money on, but that we should look at the more sexy sectors of economic development and economic activity, tourism, international business, and those interesting things, without recognizing every once in a while that fundamentally, food and agriculture are the foundations of development and fundamental to the survival of a society. We cannot profess to be an independent country, a republic on our way to development, and not being able to feed ourselves. Mr. President, urban communities also eat food. And therefore, the efforts by this government to bring agriculture to the urban community is a step in the right direction. Efforts like this help to consolidate our independence and reduce our vulnerability to the surge in global food prices which we have seen recently. But urban agriculture is not only about agriculture or about food. Urban agriculture is about provision of urban employment, about community development, and the provision of activities for the engagement of the urban population, especially the urban youth, from disadvantaged areas, their engagement in productive enterprise, entrepreneurship. Mr. President, a recent report prepared by the CARICOM Secretariat and the World Food Programme indicates an increasing level of food insecurity in the Caribbean. According to that report, an estimated, and I quote, an estimated 2.8 million people, or 40% of the population of the English-speaking Caribbean, is now food insecure. 1 million more than in April of the year 2000. Severe food insecurity continues to increase in the region, with the current figure at 72% higher when compared to the year 2020. It is clear to me, therefore, that the government of Barbados is aware of the vulnerability of the Barbados society and economy to high levels of food insecurity, and through its Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Security, has initiated important plans and projects to increase food security of the nation. Among the initiatives proposed are plans to increase household food security by enabling householders and homeowners to produce some of their food in home and community gardens. And I would like to say that the recent Hope House Building Initiative, where homeowners are going to be given an opportunity to obtain sustainable and renewable energy as part of the proposal, that food security should also be included in that proposal. And each home that is built should be provided appropriate space to have a home garden where they can grow some of their own food. The ministry is implementing a project called Project CARE, which seeks to provide support to individuals, communities, and social entities in every constituency across the island, supporting home gardening. Project CARE is a proposed national response to the global food crisis, which looms as a consequence of the combined economic and logistical factors which have been triggered by the war in Ukraine and, of course, the fallout from the COVID pandemic. The CARE project seeks to promote community spirit among home gardeners, the kind of exchange of produce that Senator Cummings mentioned, of neighbors collaborating with each other in sharing the products of their efforts, strengthening community linkages, promoting cooperation, the sharing of knowledge and information, and encouraging residents to help themselves to improve their food and nutrition security by producing some of their food in home gardens. This will encourage residents to cooperate in development of community gardens also, and build back the community in ways that we knew communities existed in Barbados in the past. In addition, the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training recognizes that there's need to promote agriculture and agricultural education in schools. The ministry has embarked on a school's agricultural science and beautification program across several nursery, primary, and secondary schools throughout the island, and each school is being encouraged to identify a dedicated space for students to engage in agricultural science programs wherever practical, and it is hoped that the implementation of these proposed programs will serve to provide students with a greater and deeper understanding of the various concepts of agriculture, but also to provide them with an understanding of where food comes from. Because in our society today, there are a lot of us who still believe that food comes from the refrigerator. And those who don't believe it comes from the refrigerator believe it comes from the supermarket. They forget that food comes from agricultural production on the basis of the effort of farmers producing food for the world. And if you do not produce it here, you're going to be supporting farmers elsewhere because food comes from farms. Mr. President, the Barbados population is reported to have one of the highest levels of chronic non-communicable diseases in the Americas. This has been recognized and published elsewhere. It is recognized by many that the high incidence of cancer, obesity, hypertension, high blood pressure, heart disease, and diabetes is due mainly to the consumption of high levels of processed foods, high in trans fats, saturated fats, salt, and sugar. But it's also that a significant amount of these foods are filled with pesticides and hormones that are not good for our health. Medical records show that 8 out of every 10 deaths in Barbados is due to these non-communicable diseases. Nutritional evidence suggests that the consumption of more fresh fish, fruits, and vegetables can help to reduce the incidence of these diseases. And during the past decade, many efforts have been made to improve food security in the nation by the implementation of various policies. At the level of the household, our progress has been very limited. The production and consumption of more fruits and vegetables in our households would contribute to reducing the incidence of these diseases, thus reducing the cost of health care and improving the overall productivity of the people of our country. It is known that 1/3 of our children are obese. Just think of the implications of that for the development of our country, in terms of productivity, in terms of length of life, in terms of the cost of health care, and in terms of a country that's going forward promoting production, productivity, efficiency. If our working population is unhealthy, it is unlikely that we will achieve our goals. As a result of the COVID pandemic, we have seen the reduction in the possibility of importing all the food that we need, where countries around the world have taken decisions to implement their own food security initiatives and hoard their own supplies, in addition to the war in Ukraine, of course. But, Mr. President, urban farming and urban gardening is not a new concept. In 1883, citizens of depressed areas in the United States of America used vacant lots in Detroit to grow food. These plots were called Pingree potato patches, after the mayor of Detroit, Hazen Pingree, who introduced the concept. More recently, during the Second World War and after the war, victory gardens were promoted in cities across Europe to help reduce the food insecurity and rebuild the cities after the devastation of war. And these gardens result in the production of over 3 million pounds of produce, or 44% of the fresh fruits and vegetables that were produced at that time. In 2010, New York City saw the building of the world's largest rooftop garden as a result of municipal programs on the Green Infrastructure Project. And in Singapore, hydroponic and aquaponic rooftop gardens and vertical gardens are now something of a common sight. Mr. President, while Barbados is not at war, in the conventional sense of the word, we are at war. We are fighting the war of non-communicable diseases. Chronic non-communicable diseases is a threat to our development. And unless we take all the steps that are necessary to win this war, we will not achieve the national goals that we seek to achieve. Increasing food insecurity, growing unemployment, increasing the level of crime, and the tsunami of chronic non-communicable diseases demands our attention. And agriculture should be a priority of our country going forward. We cannot, in my view, continue to put 1.5% of our budget into the agricultural sector and believe that we're going to achieve our objectives. I have proposed the establishment of a Barbados Home Gardeners Association in my work with the Ministry of Agriculture that will promote the production of food in small spaces. It is amazing how much food you can produce in small spaces if you apply the technologies of today. I hope, therefore, that this project and this resolution will be a success, and that its implementation can be an example to what is possible in the promotion of urban agriculture in the context of our country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Brathwaite. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's very difficult to add a lot more to what has already been said, but I do want to first congratulate the government on the initiatives that they've taken as it regards to agriculture from the time it became the government. Any of us who are going to be truly honest, within the last probably 15, maybe 20 years, this has been a start of a huge undertaking that this government has done in terms of pushing agriculture. And I want to personally, again, congratulate the minister responsible for agriculture, because I remember when he first was announced as being, I said to him from across the table that this is going to be a huge task and a transformational achievement if you get the things done that we're proposing. And he is well on his way, and I want to congratulate him. Now, with all the things that have been said, I want to take a different look at where this particular project can benefit the society. You know, we talk a lot about the disease, non-communicable diseases. We talk a lot about crime and the other things, but there's something that is happening in Barbados, and it happens all over the world. But I've watched it from a young man to where I am now. I mean, just 1 year shy of being 60 years old. And there's a huge gap. When I was young, they used to call it a generation gap between our elder people and our younger people. And imagine all of the information and experience that older persons have in agriculture. I remember as a youngster growing up in rural Barbados, every single house that I can remember had either some sort of fruit trees, they had kitchen gardens. In some instances, some people even had sugar cane planted side of the houses and stuff, which meant that coming out of the slave experience and coming out of the apprentice experience, and these are historical things, our people had to feed themselves. They could not rely on imports. They had to be able to feed themselves. And they did it with very little, other than their own sweat equity, their own hard labor that they put into it. And in those days, you would see families, 14, 15, 16 children. But never once were they going to bed hungry. They might not have had the most nutritious food, as people would like to say, but between the communities, and I always go back to this, if you had potatoes and I had yams, we used to barter, we used to share, and we were our brother's keepers in a sense, because what was the common denominator, we were all poor. We were all poor. And so we didn't have the luxury of getting into our fancy cars to go to fancy supermarkets to shop. We had to make sure that we ate by planting and growing chickens in the back and growing turkeys when it was coming home to Christmas and having pigs and doing all sorts of things. So this presents for us a unique opportunity for older persons within the communities to now interact with younger people, to pass on that knowledge in terms of what you can plant, how you plant, when to expect it to be ready to be, harvested and this sort of stuff. But it also gives those older people the opportunity to socialize, to actually get out of the house and meet with younger people, people that they only see once a while if they pass through the house to get something to eat and gone again. And if we're getting the younger fellas off the blocks involved, and I hammer this point all the time, any young man gains a sense of self-worth when he or she, well, should put girls in it too, when he or she can take care of themselves, or at least do something for themselves. I remember a certain amount of pride I had as a youngster, planting beans for the first time, and actually just, when I saw them actually come out, the feeling that you get inside, that you actually planted that, and now your family has the opportunity to eat them on Sundays, or lettuce, or whatever it is that you did. There's no feeling like there's a sense of accomplishment. And so this project goes a lot wider than what we see in front of our eyes in terms of food security and all the other things. Yes, it does. But there's a social interaction that will come out of this if it is done correctly, if we encourage the older persons and the younger persons in the society, the boys and the girls and whoever else, the not so young, to get involved. And I've said it in here before, we need sometimes, as we used to say in music years ago, you need to get down in the mud sometimes to understand the other person that you have to live with. And if this becomes a common denominator in which we can bring people together, think about this and the effect that it does have on the wars that we talked about, but not the wars overseas, the wars that we have with young fellas in this country. I saw years ago there was a program, I think our Prime Minister was in charge of youth at that particular point in time. And they had, this program was where young fellas on blocks were given tools to create gardens and different things. And I always remember that particular program, because there were places across this country that was just bush, that was like eyesores. And when you saw what those young men were able to do, I remember it was like a competition, but when you saw what those young men were able to do with the assistance from the then government, and able to create these gardens and things, they can do the same, and those were just beautification gardens. Now we're talking about food. Imagine, if you will, what can come out of the urban corridors now, starting there. This may be where we start in the Black Rock area, but I'm sure that children going to school and telling other children from different parts of the island, look, this is what is happening in my community, and these are the benefits that we are reaping from this. I am able to grow carrots and actually not only just eat them, but have carrot juice to drink when the time comes. So it means I don't have to buy soft drinks, sweet things anymore. I'm acquiring the taste now for juicing this or whatever else. I mean, there's so many, there are health benefits, there's social benefits to it. I mean, you can't ask, in my opinion, for anything better than this. But we need all communities to see this as a pilot project to bigger things. And of course, as was mentioned earlier, if we can reduce our import bill, that is a monumental thing. I mean, I've been hearing about these import bills now when I was a much younger man up until today. And as a representative, one of the things that I encountered on many occasions were people coming into my office and talking about how expensive the food is in the supermarkets, and they can't buy it, and they need help. And the truth is that if we buy seeds and we can grow our own food, there's no guarantee that it's going to be an easy task, because with climate conditions and all the things going on, and I've heard us talk about the use of technology and things. I believe we will get to that. But if we're being realistic, in urban corridors where people don't have a lot of money to spend and stuff, that is going to be pretty difficult. That's probably going to be second, third, or fourth step. But if we can get people to begin where they are, get seeds, get cans, these types of things, or even I've seen on the internet, and I've seen here, people using PVC pipes and these things to get vertical growing of things, and it's just water. These are the things you're passing on, skills, because some of the people may not necessarily want to be hands-on doing stuff like that, but you may be able to pull out those persons who are more skilled in terms of teaching the others how to actually build out the horses, we call them horses, that you can put the cans in and this sort of stuff. So, and again, for me, the importance of it really is just beginning to get communities to interact in a complete different way, and using this particular project as part and parcel of that. For most of us who would have come through, let's say, 60s, 70s, we were, most of us, I dare say, would have been part of some sort of social group, some sort of football club, some sort of something. And I remember many years ago, you playing football or whatever, the entire community comes out onto the pasture to watch you play. Brought people together. And I see this initiative, this creation of community agriculture, being able to replicate that same type of atmosphere all over again. And like I said, working in the division of culture, and pardon the pun, but agriculture is part of our culture. You can't get away from it. And you can't always allow people to keep making references to agriculture and slavery as if this is all it is. Because that has been, in my mind, one of the factors that drives a lot of people away from agriculture. I've had conversations with persons in the sector who are complaining over and over again that even things like cotton industry can't find people to get involved with it. Reason being, lots of people believe this is regressive, this is stepping backward, right? Then you have another set of people that say, oh, this sound too hot, so I can't deal with that. This thing. All I'm saying is that I can see where, if we can get people involved in this, we get that buy-in, we will begin to tackle those types of mindsets when you get people to understand that one of the basic tenets of existence is to be able to have food. Food, shelter, health care. Those are 3 pillars of survival. And water. But those are three major tenets of survival. Basic things. And if you can take care of them for yourselves, you're on your way to achieving any other goals that you want to achieve in life. But you have to have those 3 things sorted. And I think that this particular project, as we look at it, is more than commendable. It is needed at this point in time. You know, Mr. President, I find it hard. Maybe I'm probably born in Maine. They keep saying that Taurus people are very stubborn and all these kind of things. Maybe I'm stubborn. I believe so. Maybe I am. But I find it hard, real difficult to comprehend how a war in Ukraine means that I, John King, must suffer. I find it hard to understand. I suffer because I believe that war in Ukraine will make me suffer. It don't work that way. Why is it that I never hear anybody in Ukraine say that if they had a flood in Barbados that they can suffer? What's the difference? The difference is in the mindset. Not in the actuality of it, but in the mindset. So that if you got somebody sending you news from ESPN or wherever it's coming from, CBS or whatever, and telling you that the war in Ukraine means that you got to be hungry, and you accept it, but then you ain't getting up and do nothing to take care of yourself at all. You will be hungry. You will be hungry and you will die. And so I'm sorry, Mr. President, but I had to say that. Because I am tired of hearing people referring to this thing about a war in Ukraine causing me to be hungry. War in Ukraine caused me to be hungry. What causes me to be hungry is laziness. You gotta get the truth. Because if you do not want to do the things that you can do for yourself, there's a problem. And rather than skirt wronging, you gotta deal with the real problem is. The problem is the mindset that people have been given to agriculture. That is the problem. I talked about this in here already. When we were small, when we were young, growing up, in schools, primary school in particular, there was this thing where every fellow or girl wasn't too good at academics, you know what to do? Go and garden. What is the message that you sent to the people? They get real. And these things come back to haunt you later on in life. And I hope that, as Jesus said, those who have ears to hear, hear. I want them to hear me because I'm not going to stop on this particular point at all, not as long as they're breathing. Until we begin to give the idea of agriculture and being involved in it a different value, you're going to always have a section of the society who are going to shy away from it. And as much as we would talk about being able to take care of ourselves and to feed ourselves and these sorts of things, it hurts my heart whenever I have to talk to persons who are in the sector itself, and one of their major complaints is they can't find people to work. Can't find people to work. It's hurtful. Because I know, most of my family that I come along and see, worked in some sectors at some point in time, and in some form or fashion. And as was mentioned by Dr. Bradford earlier, we continue to feel real good to support other people's farmers and not our own, or to even do some of the things that we can do for ourselves. The question is, I asked the question one time and it's not how many more, but I ask it again. How many more years it can take for us to get it right? How many? You can't go on like this. You just can't go on like this. And the world is becoming more and more insular. And the war that people keep talking about, and Dr. Buffett was very kind when he said that, the war goes beyond bombs and things, but we're in the midst of economic war. The economic war is going on. We saw it, as was mentioned earlier, when the pandemic hit. Small islands, nobody cares if you get vaccines or not. You understand? Because with 280,000 people, 300,000 people, if all of us die out, it means nothing to somebody that got 140 million or 400 million. I mean, I keep saying, in the United States alone, the amount of people who died from COVID-19, Barbados would have been wiped out. So it means that we have to get a little bit more conscious about our standing in the world, and how people feel about us. I know people like us, but when they come in to get the sun and get the sea and all of these things and have a nice time and they enjoy themselves, yes. But once you get past that and you get back to where you're from, your interest is about what's happening in that you. So our interest must be about what's happening in that us. So that we must take the responsibility for ensuring that every single person on this island at least can get something to eat. Wherever I travel and wherever I get the opportunity, I always tell people overseas, if there's one thing I like about Barbados, at least I know about my life, is that if I am hungry, I cannot think of a house in Barbados that I cannot go and knock on the door and say, John King out here, I would like a breadfruit if you got one off the tree. Can't think of a house that I can't do it. Now, if they didn't have breadfruit trees, you couldn't do it. If all the people were smart, they knew that they had to take care of themselves. And so they had these things around the house. And I grew up and watched people, like I said before, the harping all the time, exchanging things, ensuring that as a good brother's keeper, that those children who might have been less fortunate had something to eat. And even in my own experience of coming home from school, my mother out to work, I'm the eldest of two children, but where I lived, every other house down there, Monday at this one, Tuesday at this one, Wednesday at this one, until my mother come home. Never lacked for anything to eat. Never lacked to get some last night when we play food. But the point is, it was more of a family type of society within which we live. And I believe that this particular program has the potential to begin the process of getting us back to that type of arrangement where it took a village to raise a child. And if we're going to use agriculture as part and parcel of doing that, I would lend this resolution my fullest support, and I hope that it becomes a model that other urban areas would want to emulate. And I would encourage those persons in the rural areas at this point in time to get back to what we knew as part and parcel of our own existence. The term that people use all the time is Sankofa, where you look backward to pull forward the best things that you did in the past to take you forward. And with those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator King. Senator Roberts Soto.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I will say that the Leader of Government Business did her usual complete job in the presentation of this bill, this resolution. And in listening to her, I was struck by some of the irony about the way that some of us think in this country, and specifically with regard to the topic of food deserts, Mr. President. Because many of us still carry the thought process that in America, the land of milk and honey and everything that you want is available everywhere, and you will never go hungry, and if only we could leave Barbados and go to the States. In some cases, leave Barbados and go to Canada. All of our problems would be solved as an individual. And so when she spoke about food deserts, I was struck by the irony of that thought. Because we who live in 166 square miles, we're arguably, well, unless you hit morning or midday traffic, you hardly have to go maybe an extreme, an hour, to get to a supermarket that covers all of your needs. The truth is that those food deserts in the United States is a real thing. There are people who have to travel 4 to 6, and in some cases, a day to get to a supermarket, plan to spend the night in the neighboring town, and then to drive home in order to be able to feed themselves. And I'm not talking about feeding ourselves with any and everything, as my goodly colleagues who went before me spoke towards the need for nutritious food. Food that not only adds to your calorie count, but adds to your body's function, your brain's function, your ability to have cognitive control in its totality. So it was an interesting concept, one I came across in my research for this particular presentation. Because when you looked at it, and has been spoken previously, that inability to have nutritious, real food does not just create problems as it relates to non-communicable diseases, which we all know about, which we continuously and are learning more and more about the risks that we face on a day-to-day basis in Barbados. But it also creates more problems in terms of our children, because you have to feed yourself. You have to feed the children. Your time is valuable. So traveling 6 hours ain't gonna make sense every week. Traveling a day is not going to make sense once a week every month. So you will eat what is available. That is not a US concept. That is not a Canadian concept. That is an every single human being concept. You will eat what is available. And the results of what is available to you will not only add to your waistline, it will add to the amount of money you eventually have to pay to handle the issues that you face: diabetes, high blood pressure, and many other issues. But as she spoke about how that related to Barbados, it came to the point of this issue has been one over the past 10 years, and particularly over 2 years, which is being researched in the United States, which they're continuing to talk about, which they're opening various factors and subsectors to talk about, as she spoke about, the effect of racism, the effect of class, the effect of geographical indicators, but also the effect of affordability. And the reality is there is no one in here who is going to say or to go against the fact that there are many Barbadians, but there are some Barbadians who will tell you they live at or under the poverty line. We've seen some of the research that come out that speak towards that segment of Barbadians who are able to afford their weekly shop based on the assistance from family, the assistance from welfare. And the reality is, when you look at this segment of Barbadians, you can get the impression that there are quite a few of them who realistically live in the urban quarter. As would have been previously spoken about, in the country, there is space. There is an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to share what you have grown, and a vibe, as the young people would say, counting myself still amongst them, of sharing in the urban quarter, in the rural quarter. But the reality is, in our urban sectors, there are still individuals who live on plots of land which the house itself takes up the totality of the land. They don't have the availability of a corner to be able to cultivate anything. In some cases, even though they've lived on that plot of land for generations, they don't own it. Their availability to cultivate anything on that plot of land is dependent on whether or not your landlord says, all right. Not only that, you have the issue with your availability to grow. There is the issue with your capacity or knowledge in order to grow. As Senator King would have pointed out, a lot of that knowledge, when in various parts of Barbados' history, people moved from rural to urban, and a lot of that knowledge would have been left where it was. Then you have the added issue of you are not just trying to feed a household of 2 or 3. You're trying to feed, in most cases, multi-generational households. Not just 1 or 2, but 3 or 4. I myself, I'm a child who grew up in a household with 3 generations. Grandparents, all of their children, which totaled 8 at the time, and then 5 or 6 grandchildren. So that was, at my time, 13 people living in a 3-bedroom house. It was not an easy thing. But the truth of the matter is, in the past, there were methods and methodologies to deal with that. My grandmother raised chickens and turkeys, which she would have sold at various points in time. She wasn't into agriculture. A green thumb was not her thing, but she would raise animals, so to speak. But the reality is, in the society that we live in today, we have not gone away from multi-generational households. There are still many multi-generational households in the urban quarter without, in some cases, the knowledge basis in order to be able to turn back to agriculture, and without the availability of land to be able to cultivate anything. So when I say to you that this particular project hits the mark for me on these issues, it does. But it also hits the mark for me on the fact that it is not a standalone piece of legislation. It doesn't stand alone. It fits into the government's framework about all the different aspects through which we are trying to address the needs of Barbadians. Because Barbadians are not some one homogeneous group in the way that some people think of us. There are some of us at the upper end, there are some of us at the lower end in the socioeconomic scale. There are some of us with skill sets who will train, and there's some of us without skill sets, and some of us with skill sets who will not train. So the reality of the situation is this government has tried on a wide spectrum of policies and procedures to go at the problems that we face. We started with how do we reset ourselves as a country financially, with reprofiling our debt, with trying to solve those situations. We've gone into what are the areas of society and the areas of the economy which have been neglected. We have gone heavy into agriculture. Could there be more? Is there more to be done? As my friend Senator Brathwaite will tell you, there's always more to be done in agriculture. But this government has placed a heavy emphasis on such. And as I joined previously with the kudos towards the Minister of Agriculture, I have to say not every program you ever create in the course of a government will be a success. But the energy and the invigoration with which you go at those projects makes the difference. And the energy with which this government has gone at the feed project makes a difference. The energy with which we have dealt with the layers urban land lease has made a difference. And the Cures program, which I envision making a huge difference to urban Barbados, will make an even bigger dent in this situation, because it will give those I spoke about earlier, with knowledge and without knowledge, but with passion, with an understanding that you have to do something to make this work, an opportunity to get at it, to get at the task. I don't have the money to buy land. The government is making land available through this resolution in this particular instance, and I'm sure there are more to come. I don't have the financing or the knowledge to be able to plow a plot of land and just throw the seeds and make it grow. So the government is giving an opportunity through the feed program for training, for understanding. Through the Cures program, you get the impetus, the seeds and the planting materials, and the ability to go at this project with vigor, with understanding, and with an opportunity to pour yourself into a chance to do better for yourself and your children. But this is not merely by itself. This also fits into, as spoken previously, the national nutrition policy. Because it is not just a matter of telling you, look, that you're feeding that child don't make sense, don't bring it back. It is also a position of saying to you, there are better ways. There are other ways. Let's put some things in place and some guidelines to teach our children, to help their parents, and through this project to provide an opportunity for you to provide for yourself. And I feel as though sometimes we walk past the policies that the government puts out, and I hear it sometimes, oh, they're doing this, they're doing that, nothing makes sense, nothing interlinks, nothing builds the house that they're talking about. But I hope that people can see the house being built, policy by policy, project by project, leading us somewhere that is better for a country, together. But I also, in this, don't want us to get mystified and misty-eyed and think that justice is going to solve the problem. It will not. This alone will not solve the problem. All of the other policies alone will not solve the problem. We have to recognize the issues that we face as a country externally. My good friend Senator King brought up the issues as it relates to the Ukrainian war. And the reality is that, whether we like it or not, the things that we buy in the supermarket are affected by the things that go on outside of our shores. There's grain that is grown in Ukraine that you would never have known that ends up in your supermarket and on your plate that you eat. So when something happens out there, it affects the price of what you eat here. Not just that, the sanctions that have been put on the oil industry and in terms of Russia have affected the price of oil globally. That has also affected the cost to get those goods that we import from other places here. It affects the cost to get the vehicle from the port to the supermarket affects the price or the markup that goes on those goods in the supermarket. I know it is hard to fathom, but what goes on out there affects what happens in here. And we have to be able to have that discussion. But I also understand the policy position, the common sense position that we as a people have the opportunity to take the levers of our future into our hands and go at the soil. And this is what this kind of resolution is aimed at doing. So I understand where Senator King is coming from. This kind of resolution is aimed at giving people an opportunity to see what is happening in Ukraine, understand its effects, but also understand I can have an impact on what goes on my plate, what goes in my stomach, and what my child eats every day, and how that affects my pocketbook. So I'm very excited to see this project, but I want to see more. I want to see this replicated across the country where the opportunities exist in the urban community for people to have a chance to be the masters of their own food fate, so to speak. Also, I want us to go ahead and start to assist not just in these ways, but also to do things such as put videos on YouTube. And I know the ministry is looking at it as to how do you go about cultivating beans, potatoes? How do I go about turning this seeds and this grass, well, the soil under the grass, into something that makes sense for me to then have an opportunity to put in my stomach and to share and possibly to create an economic avenue and to sell in this country. So, sir, I am without a doubt in full support of this resolution. And with that, I'm obliged to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Honourable. Senator Herod.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I had all intentions to open the button or get as close to the opening button as possible because I recognize on topics of this nature and a few other topics, you kind of place into a broken radio kind of position, you know, a broken record kind of position. But I believe some of the things, if they may be replicated from myself, are worth re-emphasizing because this is an extremely important topic. Sir, before I begin, I must say that I had the privilege of visiting the location this morning, which is in Black Rock, the exact location for the proposed project. And I think, which is consistent to my approach of visiting lands when it comes to land resolution, it would really be beneficial to all members in the chamber, sir, to really visit the location and see what has been done before and what is proposed to be done with respect to this resolution for 3.5 acres of land to the back of the psychiatric hospital. So, sir, we're welcoming a resolution today that focuses specifically on vesting of that land for urban agricultural purposes in the Black Rock area, as I said, to the back of the psychiatric hospital. Now, this is a resolution simply put to put food somewhere where it is not currently being grown, and also to create direct and indirect benefits, sir, in the process. I believe the resolution is straightforward, and I also believe that we will not encounter any level of belligerence or contention amongst the contributions that have gone before or that will come subsequent to mine. There's so many benefits to be accrued, sir, if and when we get this right, again, because it has been done already. And we don't have the opportunity now, sir, to neglect any particular effort with respect to providing support services for this initiative. Mr. President, let me begin by giving credit where credit is due. The 3.5 acres of land to the west of the psychiatric hospital to the back represents a continuation of a project that has started since 2019 in St. Michael Northwest, where it's located. and a project that has been pioneered by the Member of Parliament for St. Michael Northwest, sir. And that project was called the Northwest Alliance Agricultural Project. And it is situated directly next to that 3.5 acres within this resolution, and it is 1.5 acres actually. And the origins of that project, and I got the story this morning, is that a young man who was incarcerated, when he came out of jail, he came to the now MP for the area and asked him for any opportunities with respect to employment. And he also mentioned within the preferences that he had, perhaps something in agriculture. And the young man lives 50 meters away from the 1.5 acres that he's currently cultivating. And what happened as a result of that is that the MP for St. Michael Northwest approached the then Minister of Housing, because the portion of land that's 1.5 acres is really NHC land, to seek permission to utilize the land for agricultural purposes, sir. And I wish that members had the opportunity to come with me this morning or go afterwards, because it is well developed. It is extremely well developed, sir. There's sweet potato, I saw some carrots this morning, drip irrigation, of course, and I saw quite a few other pens that were erected. I believe they had sheep at one point to the eastern end of that particular location, sir. So, sir, what we're discussing today is an extension and an enhancement on something that has already been started and something that represents a commitment in that Rosemont area. So, sir, I want to, before I go on, I want to just commend the MP for St. Michael Northwest, who also spoke in the other place last week, I believe, very passionately about this and approved it with other persons in the other place, because he recognized and he recognizes the impact that this particular project can have not only on food security, sir, but on the social fabric of that particular community. Now, when we step back from the specific content of the resolution, the parameters or the boundaries and what can be grown and all that stuff, sir, we can actually look at a broader global context that is aligned to our local situation, and we can clearly see why this is a pivotal intervention at this time. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, sir, 55% of the world's populations reside in urban areas, cities and towns. According to the same FAO, 79% of all food produced is destined for consumption in urban areas, sir. Now, these two factors alone will stimulate the interest of any business minds and definitely give them some direction in terms of estimating profitability in any business models that they can calculate without even picking up a calculator. But essentially, it speaks to large-scale satisfaction of demand in these densely populated areas. And the prospects and the benefits, financial and otherwise, are endless, sir. But to name a few, permit me throughout this contribution to focus on the gains in the areas such as jobs, value creation, climate change, household savings, and disposable income, sir. As it relates to jobs, even without crunching numbers and without having any numerical analysis, we can recognize the prospects of efficiencies in establishing urban food gardens, owing to the sheer relative proximity, sir, of farmers to the urban consumers. It implies that they can get their goods much faster, and it implies, sir, that the goods that are grown relatively closer to the customers can get there in a manner that is more suitable to the activities or the ending activities that the customers want them for. Therefore, the implications of job creation, sir, make this venture of urban agriculture worth exploring. It could be their primary job. It could be someone that is doing security work that comes in, and it could be their secondary job. It could even be a third job for someone else, sir. But the prospects are high. And it therefore means that the attraction of getting involved, sir, could extend to the boys on the blocks. In this case, the boys also meaning the girls. In this case, the blocks also meaning the places where persons who are unemployed or underemployed settle. And this could also mean households as well, sir. Households can be blocks, yeah? Agriculture, and certainly urban agriculture, is not partial to participants based on their age. And I dare say, sir, that within these densely populated urban areas of this country, we need to treat with greater respect the abundance of knowledge, sir, the abundance of knowledge in agriculture, much of which is formally classified as retired, and most of whom still have a lot to offer, sir. We heard a contribution this morning, or a few contributions this morning, that can validate that particular claim. And while I agree without reservation that we need to continue to level the playing field so that women and girls can have equal access and equal opportunity to urban agricultural projects, I equally endorse a notion of establishing a fund that targets retired individuals, sir, and embraces their concepts and proportionate financing, all reasonable factors being considered. And I would go even further, sir, to say that, well, we have the youth entrepreneurship scheme that we also need to allow, which allows the young people to capitalize on their dreams, that we can also allow something quite similar for the more experienced generations. And if I were ever permitted to give it a name, I would call it the Retired Reinvestment and Economic Dream Fund, which is called, an acronym, RETRIED Fund, and not Retired Fund, sir. Sir, as it relates to the other values with respect to this project, there's the land value, and this is a very short aspect. Another benefit which noticeably from the outset could increase the value of the land. And what the increase in the value of the land means is that those cooperatives, that individual who has legal possession or legal title to the agricultural land in the urban area can now collateralize that land so that he or she can expand on the financing and expand on the operations of urban agriculture within the location, sir. And sir, no matter where we are, and I'm speaking now to the point of environment, by virtue of traveling a shorter distance and having the produce closer to the consumers in these densely populated areas, it means that we are emitting less carbon equivalent, sir. And the carbon footprint of the country will be lesser as opposed to the regular commute of bringing produce from the more rural areas down to the cities as well, sir. And sir, this is where a half-hour drive may now be less than 5 minutes commute, maybe on a bicycle, or even better, sir, as I can recollect, in my early days, a walk to the households as well. Household savings is another benefit of this urban initiative, sir. The concept of delivering on bicycles, as I said, makes me turn back to my early days. I remember many years ago, sir, we had two gentlemen in my community. One gentleman, God rest his soul, was located 50 meters to the north of my house. He had a ground, had lettuce, tomatoes, and stuff. And every Sunday, like clockwork, around 11:30, just before 12 o'clock, this gentleman would come, knock at the door, get a good set of lettuce, a good set of tomatoes, different produce for next to nothing. Probably like $5 to get a whole bundle together. I remember it, sir. And this is not necessarily urban, but this is what I'm talking about in terms of persons being relatively close to the consumers as well. The gentleman also had a brother, sir, and his brother was into dairy farming as well. And I remember like clockwork as well, relatively early, maybe 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, you get a knock at the door, a bottle of milk, 2 bottles of milk, you give them back the empties, you collect the original ones, and then you proceed to boil the milk and have a drink. And those who know how to do it right know that you can take off the scab or bear the brunt of being grossed out like I was and drink the scab as well and get some licks if you don't drink the scab as well. So, sir, the long and short of what I'm saying here is that as a result of those two gentlemen servicing my household and the entire community, sir, we either saved a trip to the supermarket or we reduced the amount of the total spend when we actually went to the supermarket because that person's in close proximity could provide the same thing, sir. And this is the concept that was shared to me this morning when I went down to the location. We really just want to have an economic drive in that particular area so that we can service the community initially and then hopefully expand to some of the businesses in the area as well, sir. Sir, as it relates to climate change, no matter what time of the year, because we're still talking about the environment as well, no matter what time of the year this chamber or any chamber across the Caribbean discusses agriculture, we will discuss climate change. it is almost like the standing committees that we're looking to discuss. It will be a permanent fixture on any discussion in agriculture, sir. Climate change is the single largest threat to food security all over the world, sir, followed very closely by supply chain vulnerabilities. Sir, we're living in a time of prohibitions, water prohibitions, owing to concerns over water supply. Therefore, at this particular juncture, in the absence of any concrete water reclamation or water reuse guidelines, initiatives like this one must rely on the methods to service the demands of various crops in areas where the heat is more concentrated, owing to generations of proliferation of concrete, asphalt, and the other thermoconducive materials, sir. Basically, it's just saying that they got a lot of concrete houses and roads in the area, it's densely populated, and it is relatively more, pardon? Okay, sorry, sir, just had a little something fly my eye. No, sir, here in this project, through this project, is an opportunity, unbeknown to the participants, to tackle two significant issues at the same time, sir. The issue of drought and the issue of flooding at the same time. And how do we do this? How can we address flooding and scarcity at the same time, sir? Sir, I'll allow you to take a guess. No, sir, don't take a guess, because if you guess, you're going to probably disrupt my presentation. And I know that you know the answer, sir. The answer is harvesting, sir. Harvesting addresses scarcity and flooding at the same time. Sir, to the west, yes, to the west of the particular location in question, we have more than 170 government households, government units in that particular vicinity. To the east of the particular location, sir, more than 20 or 30 or so government units as well. From my rough estimation, I can tell that that is about 108,000 square feet collectively of roofing space, which approximates more than 66,000 gallons of rainwater, given a 1-inch precipitation at any given time, 1 inch of rainfall at any given time, sir. Now, sir, that is the equivalent of 1 million of these, 236 milliliters, 1 million of these, sir, at any given time for 1 inch of rain. And it means, sir, that a real opportunity exists at this same location, since the majority of them don't have the water tanks, for persons to have that intervention at a reduced cost with respect to water to provide for the agricultural project that they're doing there, sir. And I believe that if we can have a collaboration and a cooperation with the National Housing Corporation, some of the owners of the properties as well, sir, that we can reduce the input cost of doing business on those particular properties, sir. Equally as well, I believe that the leader of government business will also be interested in this. There is a windmill on the location as well, sir. And the windmill offers the opportunity to integrate renewable energy into the entire project, whether it be renewable energy to integrate artificial intelligence, as Senator Bradford was aware of yesterday in a forum that he and I attended, whether it be energy to refer to pumps for the irrigation system as well. But the long and short is that there is scope for the integration of renewable energy there as well, sir. Sir, I want to extend for the next 20 minutes that I have left, sir, I want to extend into the discussion of social cohesion, sir. And I believe Senator King touched on this. Now, sir, promoting more cohesive engagements within the community is a very crucial aspect of this project. Put the economics aside, put the environment aside, sir. One of the things that concerns me where I grew up and where I still live is the deterioration, sir, of the collective responsibility within the community. And let us be real, community spirit in Barbados, it is alive. It is still alive, but it is not as alive or thriving as it was 3 decades ago. And this is when the community felt, sir, like one huge backyard. It does not have that particular feel in my estimation anymore. Now, for that cohesion to be in place, there needed to be a common understanding, sir, and common goal to which every member, if not the majority of the members, appreciated and embraced that community feel. So a few decades ago, out of the hardships and the realization that a community needed to raise a child. As Senator King mentioned earlier, the adults became brothers and sisters automatically out of that necessity and the appreciation for general resource limitations that existed. Sir, today the resources are still limited and the sources of community cohesion have evolved. And this project presents an opportunity for people of all ages, sir, to congregate in a collective effort. An effort to add to food security, an effort to add to economic opportunity and build closer relationships between community and corporate Barbados, an effort to address matters pertaining to climate change adaptation and flood mitigation, as I just mentioned, an effort, sir, to embrace each other and rejuvenate our community culture. And ultimately, sir, an effort to establish a socio-economic and environmental base at the heart of the community for future generations to build on. Sir, this is a collective effort. No better summarized than by the words of Oprah Winfrey 10 years ago today at the 2013 commencement address to Harvard alumni, in which she said, "No matter who we are or what we look like or what we may believe, it is possible, and more importantly, it becomes powerful to come together in common purpose and common effort, sir." The underlying principles of this project, sir, and others of a similar nature have the potential to provide safe passage over some of the most troubling issues that threaten to derail the gains across Barbados, sir. And crime is not excluded from that. And while it is not a silver bullet project, it is a more productive distraction than many other activities of interest at risk, that face at-risk persons. Now, sir, what happens when others see the gains from these interventions, sir? Sir, it is replicated, people get interested, and people genuinely gravitate towards it and follow it, sir. This is genuine appreciation. This is not the type of appreciation, sir, where you will go and beg an entire crowd back you in the community to come down to your establishment and pretend that you put on a big crowd for the world or Barbados to see. It is not that, sir. This is a genuine intervention in St. Michael Northwest, sir, to allow persons and young people in the community to appreciate what agriculture has to offer. Sir, I want to also say to he who much is given, much is expected. And I recognize and reflect on the budgetary statements this year from the Honourable Prime Minister, where we would have allocated $2 million to the Barbados Agricultural Society. And this was for loan funds for the farmers. And while that fund is not necessarily directly linked to this project, I would like to say again that the Barbados Agricultural Society has an obligation, sir, to ensure that some of the aspects of agriculture, particularly building out business models for small farmers, and small farmers in the urban belt, relative to those in the rural who have benefited for many years, that the Barbados Agricultural Society has an obligation today, sir, to ensure that these projects in urban Barbados take equal importance to those that have been benefiting across rural Barbados, sir. Sir, I believe I will take a pause there at this particular juncture, only to say that I fully align to the comments made by other senators before me, and that I fully embrace and endorse this particular measure in recognition that it is an expansion of an already existing project and the huge benefits that it has to offer not only to members of that particular constituency, but all across urban Barbados, sir. So with those few words, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Harewood. Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank all of the honourable senators who have spoken. Dr. Charleston Brathwaite is very much, as we know, an exemplar in the area of agriculture and has served at the highest level of ICA, representing the Americas, and so he is no stranger to the hemispheric, not even the regional or national agricultural landscape, and his contributions are always welcome and welcome additions to a conversation on agriculture. Senator John King and Senators Shanika Roberts-Odell, along with our just concluded Senator Lorenzo Harewood, I want to also thank you for your contributions. I just want to address one issue that would have come up, and I want to thank Senator Shanika Roberts-Odell for treating to it in great detail. but I know that we are dealing with, and I'm very sensitive to, certainly as a productive sectors minister, and one of the persons who works very closely with the Prices Compact. And so I feel it is important that we ensure that the quality of information that goes into the public space is always at the highest level, and that we don't necessarily always, or we don't always agree, that we always make sure that we share as much information as is available to us. And sometimes we don't always have available information, and so when that is the case, we make it available in other cases. And so, Mr. President, we had in January an extensive discussion, and certainly over the last few months, you have heard the hue and the cry about the concerns of pricing in Barbados. It is a real issue, Mr. President, and so in the course of this conversation today on this resolution, the importance raised by all of the honourable senators who have spoken, and certainly I am certain that even those who have not spoken have heard the conversations around what needs to be done to encourage us to be even more self-sufficient in circumstances where that which happens external to Barbados is likely to impact us. We could not have imagined that there would have been a COVID-19 pandemic, and certainly no one would have expected that war would have broken out in Ukraine. But those exogenous factors, as well defined by the economists, have resulted in certain circumstances evolving here in Barbados. And so, for example, Mr. President, I, as Minister of Energy, have had the opportunity to track the data. So I haven't had the opportunity to go on a basis of what I would prefer, but it is what is. Oil and gas prices in particular have soared starting from the first 6 months of the Ukraine war by 120 to 130%. And there were instances where it was even higher. So the impact of 30% increase in oil and natural gas pricing will have a run-on effect on transportation prices, and we saw that from the Far East in particular. In Eastern Europe, we saw shipping prices increase by, in some instances, close to 500%. Not 1%, not 2, not 3, but 500%. It meant, Mr. President, that everything on those ships that came into our countries had the run-on effect of, in the first instance, increases in pricing from oil and gas to fuel those ships, increases in transportation to transport those ships from one port to another, and then all of the other processing charges that were resulting as a consequence. So there is no way for a small open economy as defined in economic parlance to avoid having the inflationary conditions resulting in country as a result of external things. And I want us to be very clear, and I heard that the Honourable Minister of Finance and certainly our own Prime Minister has been very, very clear that we do not live in a world by ourselves. Barbados is 166 square miles, 300,000 people. We have talked about globalization, certainly. The universities, academics, professionals have written at great length ad nauseum from the Silk Road up to now about globalization. Globalization simply means that our economies are interconnected in many ways, in some ways that we see and in some that we don't see. And so today will not change the fact that hundreds of years have evolved over time since the Silk Road, and we are seeing the effects of globalization in its positive form, but in instances where prices are impacted nationally, we are seeing it in its negative form. And so we have to always be conscious of the commentary that we share with the Barbadian public, because we do not want Barbadians to be of the view that we are here in and of ourselves and that we are completely unaffected by all of the things that happen around us when we are largely a net importing country. And the final thing that I would say on that is that you have heard our Prime Minister as well, well-respected, very credible globally, speaking also about those limited times where the country was cut off from the rest of the world, where we genuinely were dependent on just ourselves. And I remember being a minister with responsibility for international transport, having to fight to get an airport open because the country was cut off from the rest of the world, which impacted our ability to get critical supplies into the country. The message that I want to leave is that we do not live in a world by ourselves. Barbados is dependent on our relationships with those around us. And that, in turn, is going to make sure, is going to have an impact. Our responsibility as a government with resolutions like this is to mitigate where possible, but to engage in advocacy, international relations and diplomacy where we don't have control, and to build capacity in our institutions. And so with these words, Mr. President, I want to again thank our colleagues and to beg that this resolution do now pass.
The question is that this resolution related to the vesting of land at Black Rock in the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation for community agricultural purposes do not pass. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. This resolution is now passed. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we now suspend the sitting of the Senate for a long-awaited lunch until 3 p.m. in the afternoon.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 3 p.m. today. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. The sitting is suspended until 3 p.m.